Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey everyone, it's Debbie Potts, and if you're watching the video, you barely can see me. I'm in my glass house up on the hilltop of our new house, and we finally got the Google Mesh Wi-Fi system so I can actually start doing some recording up here and doing some videos. So I didn't add on my camera that makes this look a little better. So I am happy to tell you we are talking today to Dr. Hirsch, Evan Hirsch. I've heard of him many times. I've listened to him on summits, health summits, and his area of expertise is chronic fatigue. And he's a world-renowned fatigue expert and is a founder and CEO of the International Center for Fatigue. He suffered with fatigue for 5 years before he achieved resolution using his program called Fix Your Fatigue, a program that he pioneered in his medical practice. So we'll dive into his purpose, passion, and mission, as I always love to dive in with people. So let's bring him on the show and we can dive into really how you can be fit and healthy from the inside out, as I keep talking about lately. And I think a lot of athletes we train and endurance athletes, over an hour exercise isn't good for you. It raises your cortisol. So I just was listening to a great podcast with Ben Greenfield had a couple years ago on cortisol. And cortisol goes up, what goes down? Melatonin. So that impacts your sleep at night. But in the morning time, cortisol should be at its highest and drop down. And if we have high cortisol at nighttime, we're not getting that testosterone and growth hormone at nighttime. So it's going to impact all of our hormones. And we really want to get more muscle building exercises in during the week, not just do long cardio sessions. More is not better on the cardio. I keep trying to share with people that more strength training is a really important part of our aging process for our hormones and for female athletes, menopausal women. It's really important to lift weights and lift heavier. Don't be afraid, to get a little more weight on there, as I'm sitting here on the counter with my medicine ball that's 20 pounds and doing a little more slam balls and all this stuff that you can do at home or outside. As I've been lifting sandbags coming up the hill and getting that as exercise. So lifting weights, lifting heavy things, it doesn't have to be a dumbbell, but lifting weights is really important for your hormones and fat loss and keeping us healthy. So chronic stress impacts the whole you. External stressors, as well as these hidden internal stressors that we keep saying you don't know about unless you do some functional lab testing. And there are different labs that you do have to pay cash for, cash or credit card. They're not the labs that your doctor's going to run under your insurance. Sadly, it doesn't work that way. So we have to spend some money on some functional labs as a Dutch test, organic acids test, a micronutrient test, and more. So let me bring in Dr. Hirsch. We'll dive into all of that today. Hey guys, I have Dr. Hirsch on the show today, and I just was saying he's in Olympia, Washington. I just left Bellevue, Washington to North San Diego to find a little bit nicer weather year-round. So I'm happy to connect with you, and you're at where Nutritional Therapy Association is based too.
That's right. Yeah, Greg Graham and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm an NTP and FDN practitioner, and I miss our conferences. I can't wait to have them again, but reconnecting with everyone live. But I've heard of you, many summits. You're talking, my favorite topic is chronic fatigue and how we can fix ourselves. As I say, my story, all our listeners know about me. I wrote a book, Life is Not a Race, It is a Journey, because I went from top Ironman athlete to 3 months later feeling like crap, gaining weight, 30 pounds, and just feeling awful for a long time and never really found the right solution. But a lot of the stuff that you've been sharing, and you're doing a lot in your business and summit I want to dive into today, help share with our listeners, because my mission now is to help other people avoid going through what I did as an Ironman athlete and endurance athlete, because you think you're invincible when you're a fit person, right? We're fit and strong. We can do anything.
Right.
So let's talk about who you are and your passion and purpose and mission, your why.
So for me, I'm on a mission to help 1 million people resolve their fatigue and optimize their energy so that nobody has to suffer again with fatigue. And, a lot of that comes down to what my story was. My wife had fatigue for 3 years. She got better, and then she got mostly better. And then a couple of years later, I ended up having fatigue for 5 years, just about destroyed my life, my marriage, my business, all that stuff. So now that really is my passion and my purpose.
Yeah. So what was your fatigue from? Did you have like just metabolic chaos? We call it an FDN, but just like anything specific that just everything accumulates? What's your...
So what I've found is that there's these 10 different categories of fatigue, or these 10 different broad causes, which you can break down into 33 different sub-causes. And I had 30 of those 33.
Oh,
So I had a
a
crap load of
lot.
crap in my body that wasn't supposed to be there. And for those listening, don't get overwhelmed by that number. All you have to know is that there's a lot of causes out there, and you just have to figure out which ones you have.
Yeah. So as you share in your book, Fix Your Fatigue, how does someone know they have fatigue? What are some signs and symptoms that we're not doing well? And I'll add on that I think a lot of people think, oh, it's an aging process, I'm getting older, or they just accept their problems that they have and say that's their new normal. And they don't ever really realize you don't have to feel like crap. You can really learn how to feel your best and live your best life by having the certain tools to do that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. As humans, we're incredibly adaptable, and we forget what it's like to feel well sometimes. So when we think that as we get older, we're not supposed to feel as well, when actually the reality of the situation is there are a number of stressful hits that you get as you go through life, whether they are mental, emotional, or physical, like some of the deficiencies and the toxicities that we're going to talk about today. And that ends up accumulating in the body and then spills over and ends up causing symptoms and making you feel worse.
Yeah, because I know as I start to, why I wanted to go into being an FDN practitioner, because I was doing nutritional therapy and background of personal trainer for 25 years now, that it's really, I couldn't help people get healthy by just training them 2 times a week. It was what they're doing the rest of the day really was impacting their inability to lose weight. Everyone comes to you and wants to be healthy and lose weight, but just strength training twice a week wasn't the only part of getting people healthy. And then just finding ways to learn more. It's like what's actually going on, and to prove to someone what is going on under the hood by doing the functional lab testing. So what do you find, testing, not guessing, why is that so important, and what do we do about it?
That's a great question. And so for me, what I've found is that actually these causes, about 75% of them you can determine by your symptoms alone. So a lot of people are like, oh, it's going to cost me thousands and thousands of dollars for testing, and testing can definitely help. But there are certain causes that you can really determine based off of symptoms, and then you can really spend your money on those causes that really require the labs. And so those causes I have found are heavy metals, chemical toxicity, molds. Those are really the big ones that you really need the testing for. But then there's all those other ones that are like the 75% that I said that you can really determine based off of your symptoms. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting the labs, and it's a little bit of a different paradigm than the FDN one that you're talking about. But for me, what I found was that I did a lot of labs initially, and that the more that I learned and the more that I saw, then I realized, oh, okay, this is what this lab is going to show. And I got good enough to determine, oh, okay, I don't have to get this lab anymore because I know based off of these symptoms that this is what the lab's going to show. So I think it's just kind of an evolution.
Well, I found my own personal experience, what led me down to more, lifestyle habits, and I call the holistic method, is that we still, because we're usually a type A, driven, ambitious individual that just wants to get the information from labs and then take supplements. And we just think if we take that, instead of being a doctor's magic pill, if we take these adrenal pills and this supplement and these herbs, that we're just going to fix ourselves. And I did that for 8 years until COVID thankfully made us all slow down and, get our sleep. Hopefully, people don't. I didn't have to wake up at 4 in the morning and leave, and so my life totally changed last year. But I realized last year that I say every time that I didn't realize I wasn't happy. I didn't know like what happiness was. And on your wall, if people are
Mm,
watching this, it's laughing and all these lifestyle habits that I wasn't really doing as I thought I made these huge changes. I wasn't doing races anymore, but I wasn't slowing down. And there's so many different external stressors that we don't really think about that we're not going to get healthy by taking just supplements alone. We have to do all this other stuff. So what are things I know I've listened to other shows you're on about EMF and the heavy metals. So what are these other stressors that can contribute to the fatigue that we're talking about in the different kinds?
So yeah, so when we look at the causes of fatigue, I like to group them into deficiencies and toxicities. So deficiencies are things that are not in the body that are supposed to be there. And toxicities are things that are in the body that aren't supposed to be there. So deficiencies are things like hormones. So not enough adrenal function, which is managing our stress in the body, our blood sugars, our immune system, our get up and go, our sleep, thyroid, sex hormones, deficiencies in vitamins and minerals, deficiencies in mitochondrial function, which produces about 70 to 80% of our energy and is found in every single cell in the body except for red blood cells. Deficiencies in neurotransmitters, so not enough serotonin or dopamine or GABA, which have to do with our mood, anxiety, and depression. And then deficiencies in lifestyle habits, so not enough water, not enough good food, not enough sleep, not enough movement. And then there's these toxicities. So things like heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and just very briefly, heavy metals, there's 100,000 pounds of mercury that are dumped into our oceans every year that we end up being exposed to. There's 84,000 different chemicals that we're exposed to on a regular basis that we shouldn't be. Half of all the buildings in first world country have water damage, and most of those have mold.
Mm-hmm.
Infections, the CDC used to say that there were 30,000 new cases of Lyme disease every year, and now they've agreed that there's actually 476,000 new cases. And that doesn't include some of the co-infections like Bartonella that can give you muscle cramps and problems sleeping, anxiety, depression, pain in the bottom of the feet, thyroid issues, or things like Babesia, which is known as the North American malaria that causes you to sweat and be hot and give you shortness of breath and awful sleep and anxiety to the point of panic and depression to the point of suicidal thoughts. And those are just some of those infections. And then there's negative emotional patterns. So this is kind of more of the mental emotional stuff. So anything that you've experienced in your life that's less than nurturing. It doesn't have to be what we consider to be abuse, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, or things like that of that nature that we had growing up. It can be rejection by a peer group, which is something that I had that changed the way that I saw friendships, and humans were no longer safe. And that increased the stress in my life. So anything less than nurturing needs to be addressed. So that's heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, negative emotional patterns, allergies, so to foods or inhalants, and then electromagnetic fields. Anything that has a battery, anything that's putting off any sort of wavelength or frequency can damage our DNA and cause inflammation in our bodies.
Yeah, I think the EMF part is huge, especially with, all these smart homes and devices. As
Right.
I just said I got this Google Mesh. I'm up at my hilltop, but just nowadays you have everything can be on Wi-Fi, and how to make your house not so smart and be a dumb house instead of a smart house. So you're not just inundated with all these EMF signals. But it's interesting listening to your other interviews with people, if for example if they have Lyme and then they have heavy metal, and then if they have mold, and how EMF can relate to that. Dr. Klinghardt talks a lot about that too. So
Right.
it's just like you almost have everything going on. Is it because our guard is gone and we don't have any defense system to save us from these heavy metals we're taking in, and then we just kind of get sideswiped with everything when we're down, get stepped
Yeah,
on?
so it's I think of the human as like this rain barrel. And as we go through life, we're just accumulating crap. And so whether it's heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, negative emotional patterns, EMF, whatever, eventually that rain barrel is going to overflow and you're going to start to get symptoms. And it just so happens that all of those toxicities also hijack the immune system off into left field. And then these infections become more opportunistic, or the EMFs end up connecting with the mycotoxins, the mold toxins in the body, and increase inflammation that way as well. So there's a number of different ways that this ends up happening, but it is a toxic soup that has to be remedied. And, for a lot of the athletes that are listening today, exercise is an amazing detoxifier. But if you notice that as you are exercising and you are having a harder time recovering, maybe you find that now you have to consume more caffeine throughout your day, or that after you're exercising, you're crashing either that night or the next day, there's something wrong. And there's this buildup of stuff that is stressing the body, and your exercise is now stressing your body in an abnormal way that ends up leading or contributing to that total body burden and that toxicity.
Yeah, I used to think I was so healthy doing these fasted workouts and working out all, 2, 3 times a day. And I was drinking like a gallon of bulletproof coffee when, back in 2012. I think I just survived on fat, but it's like, okay, I was taking in a ton of caffeine and then I would eat later on and I was doing low carb, but I keep telling people, if you're doing too much of anything, it can be another source of stress that it just accumulates, like you said, into that rain barrel. But it's funny, you said rain barrel, and I'm thinking rainbows. When do we see the rainbows? The rain barrel, it's a toxic soup. And then when do we see the happy rainbow to make us feel like we got to the other side?
Right. Well, you left Seattle, and so you're going to miss all the beautiful rainbows up here.
Yeah, that's true. So, like, when we have all that, how do we get started? If someone comes to you and they reach out, like, I have fatigue. I definitely, like, I saw 8 to 9 different doctors when I first had my stuff in 2013, and I was on this mission, like, how to get help, and no one understands me. And I think there's so many people out there like that. They're like, okay, I'm gaining weight, but I'm doing all the right things. I don't understand what's going on with me. Why is this happening? What do we do? How can you help them?
Yeah, so step one in my 4-step process is finding the individual causes that somebody has. And that really is the most important step, because the causes that you had are different than the causes that I had. So if we talked about these 10 categories of causes, maybe you had causes 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and I had causes 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9, which means that our treatments are going to be very different. So this is why when people are asking, well, what is the best supplement that I can take for my fatigue? I tell them, you're asking the wrong question. Right? Because if you don't know what you're treating, you're wasting time and money on IV vitamin C and this supplement and ozone therapy and hyperbaric oxygen and whatever, because they're indiscriminate. They're doing their thing and you don't even know what they're doing. So, but when you know, and when you find, and when you've got a differential, when we're looking at all of these different causes, because we're looking at, 95% probably of all of the causes that are known. I mean, there's causes that are not known, right? That we're still going to continue to learn more over time. Now we've got, this pandemic with this new virus that's also causing fatigue and long haulers that we've incorporated into our fatigue programs as well, because it's a perfect fit, because the reason why they get sick is because they have all of these causes as well. But that is when you're looking at so many different causes and you make sure no stone is left unturned, that's when you're going to be most successful. And that is the most important part of this whole process, is that step one.
Well, so it's individualization of what we,
Right.
Talk about all the time, that it's not one size fits all. And we have to really, to get results, you have to individualize that protocol for that person, because they're going to have different stressors, and that totally makes sense. I think everyone just tries to do the same program because someone else did it and expect the same results. Or like I was just telling someone that I've said the whole past year of the pandemic, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, trying to expect different results. And I think that goes with people's health. If it's like, I have someone that if I've been working with them just starting working with them, they've tried all this stuff the past year. It's like, all right, your results are the same in your labs. Let's not try to do the same protocol. It didn't, something's missing. And maybe it's your lifestyle habits or EMF or different things. So what are some, things people can take action on, just daily free stuff like breathing and daylight walks, morning sunrise, exposure to sunlight? What are some things you find that really helps people in general?
Yeah, those are all really great things that you talked about, resetting your circadian rhythm, which is your sleep wake cycle, by making sure that you're getting out of the house first thing in the morning to get some sunshine. You want to make sure you're consuming 3 liters of water a day. I used to say half of your body weight in ounces, but now what I found with our program and with the Herxheimer, the die-off reactions that are happening, the fact that we have to really open up these detoxification pathways in step 3, you have to be consuming really 3 liters of water a day. You want to make sure you're not consuming, or you're consuming as little sugars and grains as possible. Some people need a little bit of grain if their adrenal glands aren't functioning well, but generally you want to be doing meat and vegetables as much as possible, paleo, keto, low glycemic sort of thing. Without being too rigid when it comes to something that's more extreme, like a keto diet. Not everybody. Once again, if it's stressful, if it's a stressful diet, if it's a stressful workout, guess what? It's stressing your body, and it's not healthy for it. So then there's getting enough sleep. Way too many people are not going to bed on time, and it should really be, between 9:30 and 10:30 is most people's sleep window. If you find that you can't fall asleep during that time, you just have to work towards that so that you can get 7 to 9 hours of good sleep a night. It's kind of funny. My wife just got an Aura ring, and they're telling her that she really needs to go to bed between 8:30 and 10 every single night, and she normally goes to bed around 8:30 or 9. But it's kind of funny that they've kind of figured that out after a week, where they're
Yeah.
noticing that she's getting the deepest amount of sleep when she's going to bed at these certain times, when they can tell when their window is. And you want to make sure you're not getting that next wind because you've missed that window. So that's not enough sleep. So you got to make sure you get enough sleep, get enough water, get enough movement, which may not be, it might be actually the converse for a lot of the people who are listening to this who are athletes, is that you may be getting too much exercise, and that's stressing the body, and you kind of have to back off. Like many things in this process, if you're not feeling well, you have to find your Goldilocks dose. Like, what is your ideal dose of exercise so that you actually feel better afterwards the next day, and you're not crashing, you're not requiring more caffeine or more naps or whatever it is. So there's that. And then there's mindset, which is a huge part of the work that we do. And a lot of this comes down to looking at the limiting beliefs that you have and putting together a program of gratitudes. There's research on all this stuff, but you want to make sure you're doing 3 gratitudes a day. You want to make sure you're envisioning your ideal day from a personal perspective, a business perspective, a relationship perspective. You want to look at any limiting beliefs that are popping up, like there's not enough time, there's not enough money, there's not enough whatever, I can't do this, and flipping it on its head, and instead speak to yourself about empowering beliefs. There's always enough time, there's always enough money, you're always going to be taken care of, whatever it is. And then the last part of that is looking at any disempowering questions that you're asking yourself, like, why is this happening to me? And instead asking yourself empowering questions like, what can I do today to move my health forward? How can I love my family even more today? How can I love myself even more today? What can I do to move my business forward today? Because the brain is a goal achieving machine. And if you ask it a bad question, guess what? You're going to get a bad answer. Because if you say, why does this always happen to me? The brain's going to tell you why it always happens to you. And you're going to be like, you're going to be stuck in it. So you can't ask yourself those questions. And so the mindset component is something very free that you can do right away at home.
Yeah, I always like that. I started doing gratitude journal on and off the past few years when it was like Thanksgiving, November challenge, gratitude journal. But I kept with it since I closed my fitness studio October 1st, 2019. I've had the same book. I'm almost done. And one side of it's all these positive quotes. And I love it. I just want to like copy all those quotes. And on the right side, I write 3 things I was grateful for that day or more. And then I set intentions for the next day. And I often do that when I'm exercising first thing in the morning. It helps me clear my head, get my mind right in what I want to achieve that day and set those positive intentions. But I have had this mantra the last year or two of positive attitude, positive vibes, positive energy. And I just find that so essential to really being healthy. And that happiness part is one of my 8 elements of the holistic method. And I just think it's so essential to just getting us healthy and helping those hormones, the stress hormones. As you can see in the back, I just noticed what's in the camera view is one of our new games, corn pole. So you throw the sandbag in the hole. We've got bocce ball and a little putting green, and now we're playing and just laughing and being silly. I keep telling people this. I think we're so like I was so type A, rigid, serious, and I just like let it go and just let yourself laugh as you have in your wall. Be silly and play. I mean, it's kind of what you're talking about, similar to it, right? That just helps your hormones and the
That's
oxytocin.
so good. I'm so glad that you brought up play. It's yeah, it's so essential to kind of get back in touch with that young child inside of us that is really free
Hmm.
and joyful.
I forgot to add, I have a swing over here hanging in the tree, and we got it. It came with the house, but it's off this eucalyptus tree. And my husband redid the seat, so it was 2 of us can sit on it. But it's just so fun, just like 1 minute, just sit there and just like feel the sense of release. It's amazing how you can feel that. Just taking a moment, 1 minute of deep nasal breathing, or going on a swing, or humming, or singing. I mean, how that helps probably your heart rate variability, and just that calming sense when people are just too anxious.
Right.
Yeah. So going back to what you're talking about, adrenal, the cortisol. I was hearing something today. I was listening to this great podcast on cortisol. I'll probably try to find the link and put the show notes, because he was talking about how the mindset and the positive programming of not saying why me, but what can I do to be better, or here's what I'm going to achieve, and setting those goals. But
Hmm.
then, so that correlated with what you're talking about, but also cortisol, if you're high or low levels in the morning and at nighttime, and how that impacts your sleep, liver detoxification, and insulin resistance. Because I found I was eating low carb and healthy real foods, but I still became insulin resistant ish. And I was trying to tell people stress is on, blood sugars up, stress is on, immune system's down. All these things happen, but how
Hmm.
high or low levels can impact our pals. We called it in nutritional therapy, your pals are your pancreas, your adrenals, and your liver, and how those are impacted from stress.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So for those of you who aren't familiar with cortisol, it's a hormone that's produced by the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland produces other hormones as well, but this is like the main one. And it is responsible for so many different actions in the body. So one of them is it's our natural anti-inflammatory. So if you think about, you've heard of cortisone, probably cortisone injections, or prednisone, which are anti-inflammatories, they all come from cortisol. They're just blown up a whole bunch more times. The cortisone is actually a breakdown of the cortisol, and sometimes erroneously, that's erroneous. That's not working correctly as well. So it's a natural anti-inflammatory. The other thing that it does is it inhibits the immune system. So if cortisol is kind of bouncing all over the place, then your immune system isn't going to be functioning correctly, and it might start attacking things like with autoimmunity. Cortisol also is responsible for regulating insulin. When cortisol goes up, it ends up suppressing insulin, which, guess what? Insulin is responsible for pushing blood sugars into the cells. If your insulin goes down, blood sugars inside the blood ends up going up. And so that's why sometimes people, if they've got excess stress, whether it's from too much stress on the human body from these toxins, or from exercise, or mental emotional stressors, then you're going to end up getting potentially blood sugar dysregulation, even if you've got like the perfect diet and all that. So that always blows people's mind. They're like, I'm doing everything right. I'm even meditating, and I still feel like crap, or I'm still getting, these issues with blood sugars and whatnot. And it's because of these chronic stressors, whether, you can be working on the mental, emotional stuff, and that's amazing and so important. But you have to remember that there's also all these toxicities that can be in your body that can trigger that stress response. And then to speak to what you were talking about, where it can be up or down, I actually get more people to sleep at night by giving them things to boost their adrenals in the morning,
I've read
which is
that.
super interesting. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that you're recreating the circadian rhythm. When the body gets confused and you're like asleep, awake, asleep, awake, asleep, awake throughout the day, that's exactly what happens at night. So you're asleep, awake, then at night, you're not getting this deep sleep. So what you want is you want to be well supported by adrenals and mitochondria and B12 in the morning, so that then your curves come down throughout the day, and then you're going to sleep so much better.
Yeah, that's why I like how you said that in the morning. Is that like including adaptogens as well? Like, do you do the mushrooms and any like special things you like people to take to get them going in the morning to help their circadian
Yep.
rhythm?
Yeah, absolutely. I do love adaptogenic herbs. I'm a fan of Siberian ginseng, eleuthero root. That's probably my favorite one. Rhodiola is good as well. Licorice can be okay, but it can have some side effects, so I don't use it that often. But yeah, I find what's interesting is that I find that the labs aren't that helpful, because if somebody's salivary cortisol is off or somebody's blood cortisol is off, oftentimes they still need adrenal support in the morning, and they still need something to kind of chill them out throughout the day, like something to increase the parasympathetic activation, so they're not in fight or flight all the time. They're in rest and digest. So oftentimes this is something like L-theanine or GABA, or some of these other lemon balm, passion flower, some of these other components that you're actually going to want to take in the morning and at night, that can be really helpful to decrease that stress response that you have throughout the day. But then you also need the adaptogenic herbs to boost the adrenals, and then additional support for the thyroid if you need beyond just the adaptogenic herbs.
Well, that's something I was going to ask about the thyroid, because I think a lot of people, if they're having adrenal issues, thyroid's usually involved in there too, because the HP access is HP to thyroid, to the ovaries, and to the adrenals. So I think people forget that just treat the adrenals, not the whole HP access system team.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I tell people that there's a beautiful dance that exists between the adrenals, the thyroid, and the gonads, whether it's ovaries in women
Oh yeah, I forgot
or
men
or
too.
or testicles in men,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
the
But
gonads.
right. So it's a beautiful dance that ends up existing. And if everybody's got to be present and accounted for in order for everything to work right in the body. And that's why hormones are so important, why so many practitioners focus on it, because you can really shift things.
Mm.
But what ends up happening is that if somebody steps out of that dance, it leaves the other two holding the bag, and they're compromised. And so 9 times out of 10, if somebody's got an adrenal problem, they also have a thyroid problem, they also have a sex hormone problem. And what ends up happening in the body is that it shifts away from sex hormone production to the adrenals for survival. They actually share a common pathway, biochemical pathway, where there's a fork in the road where the body gets to decide, are we going to shuffle these resources for survival, or are we going to move them towards the sex hormones for procreation? And guess what? 9 times out of 10, the body is going to, or 10 times out of 10, the body is going to choose survival, which is why when people have these issues, they have low libido. Their sex hormones are off, and consequently then menstrual periods are off, or it pushes people more so into early menopause. So that's why it's so important. An interesting story, or interesting thing that happens in nature, is that the Australian kangaroo actually can cease replication of the fetus during times of stress. So a female kangaroo gets pregnant, something stressful happens, the baby will actually stop growing and stop replicating until the stress has gone away. And it's that same sort of idea where all the resources are going towards survival. Because if you're not surviving, it doesn't really matter if you're making a baby. Right?
Yeah. People, you might wonder why I don't have children, because I never could get pregnant, because I was always probably under chronic stress. And I wish I knew now what I knew then. But that's probably a lot of athletes have, low libido, women that have trouble getting pregnant. If you don't have your menstrual cycle regular, all these hormone imbalances, you might want to look at the big picture and look at all these different factors that you're talking about.
And you bring up a really good point real quick about menstrual cycles and athletes. Like what's one of the first things that happens to the intense athlete who's a female, right? Cessation of
Yeah.
menstrual cycles, right? You
But
don't
as an
have them anymore.
athlete, you think it's great for female. Like, oh, doing an Ironman, I don't have to worry about that. TMI, but they think it's a great thing for a while. But then you realize, okay, this probably isn't so good for me not to have my natural hormone cycle working.
Right.
So
One of the
people,
reasons why women live longer than men is because they're bleeding every month.
oh, look at
They're
that.
detoxing.
See, we
Yeah,
should appreciate it, even though I hate it.
exactly.
Okay, so I want to make sure we have time to talk about viruses, co-infections, and I love what you talk about changing the terrain. So we know with the first steps, we get this health history, we get labs tested, we know we have chronic fatigue, and you reveal all these hidden internal stressors, these viruses, mold, Lyme disease, all this stuff. But then, what does the gut health, the terrain, have to do with that
Yeah,
treatment?
so it definitely plays a big role. Now, I'm going to go out, I'm going to say something that's a bit heretic here, where I see so many practitioners who are so focused on the gut. Now, gut is incredibly important. Like, you have to be eating well. And if you have infections in the gut, you have to get rid of them. If you've got leaky gut, you have to repair them. But if you spend all of your time on the gut and you have heavy metals, chemicals, molds, and infections, and you don't address those, you're never going to be able to heal the gut, because so many of those things have hijacked the immune system, and 80% of the immune system is in the gut and have caused dysfunction in the gut. And so you can potentially be taking a lot of supplements to heal the gut that aren't going to get you where you want to go, because you've got those usual suspects that I mentioned, the heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, that have to be removed first in order to heal the gut.
So do we start with, work on opening the drainage pathways first and make sure everything's working, because we can start to, eliminate and blow up these guys and get rid of them with a detoxification protocol. But so many people are constipated, they don't sweat properly, they might not go to the bathroom very often. So there's all these things. It's just, which way do you start with people when you know you have this? What's the next step?
Yeah,
What do you think?
so let's dive into the 4-step process, because I think that that'll answer your question.
Yeah.
So that first step is finding all the causes that the individual has. The second step is to replace the deficiencies. So we talked about the deficiencies and the toxicities, right, as being the two major categories of causes. It just so happens that this 4-step process is all about the toxicities, removing the toxicities in step 4. Now, why aren't they in step 1 or step 2? I'll tell you that in a second, but the toxicities actually have caused many of the deficiencies that we need to replace in step 2. But in order to remove those toxicities, we have to make sure that the body is robust as possible, which means we have to replace these deficiencies, adrenals and thyroid and mitochondria. I call that the big 3. And then the vitamins and the minerals and lifestyle habits and all this sort of stuff has to be boosted up so you can be as strong as possible. And then you go into step 3, sorry, that was step 2. And then you go into step 3, where you're opening up the detoxification pathways. And this is making sure that you're having 2 bowel movements a day. Part of my story was that I pooped once a week for the first 22 years of my life. Until
Wow.
I realized that that was not okay. And then I spent the next 10 years of my life trying to figure out how to poop better. So it's such, and what ends up happening is, if you're not pooping, the toxicities that you're trying to get out of your body, because the way we get crap out is by pooping it out, peeing it out, breathing it out, sweating it out. And so if there's anything going on with any of those pathways where you can't get stuff out, those toxins are actually just getting recirculated back into your body. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's what you got to do first. You got to make sure you're pooping twice a day, 2 good bowel movements a day. 1 might be okay if it's a voluminous one, but 2 a day is really great. And then you want to make sure that these beautiful filters that we have, the liver and the kidney, are well supported. You're drinking enough water, you're taking the herbs that you need in order to support these different pathways. And then the garbage system of the body is the lymph. And this is really congested. At this point, if somebody's got fatigue, it is FOS, it's full of stuff. And it's all that stuff that we talked about, the heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, blah, blah, blah. all that stuff is congested inside the lymph. So we got to make sure that we open up that lymph, make sure we open up that garbage system. And then there's the glymphatic system, which is in the brain. So this is the brain lymph, so that we can dump brain lymph into body lymph, dump body lymph into liver and kidney, in the intestines, and get that stuff out of the body, so that when we go into step 4 and we start removing those toxicities, they actually have some place to go. Otherwise, you're going to grab heavy metals, chemicals, molds, whatever it is, pull it into the bloodstream, and guess what? It got no place to go. It's just going to go right back into those compartments or a different compartment, because it's clogged, because those detoxification pathways are clogged. And this is why people feel worse when they go through this process of removing these toxicities, if they haven't gone through step 3 and they haven't opened up those detox pathways.
Yeah, and I see that in people's labs when they're like Dutch tests, if beta glucuronidase is really elevated, and like men's estrogens all seem to be really high. So those are kind of clues to something's not working in your liver.
Right.
And looking at blood chemistry labs, like I like to go through them and see, okay, if they're high or low, what is that a sign of, rather than just, okay, these are high, these are low, what you get from your doctor. But let's put them into a different format and go, okay, what does this correlate with? And it's really fun to investigate really what's actually going on, picking up all these patterns as we put the pieces of the puzzle together. But I think so many people have that liver congestion, and then they start doing a detox without doing what you're saying. Kind of the order of things is so essential.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's so many things that we're exposed to that are water soluble, which basically means they're dissolved in water, and all of that stuff goes through the liver. And so it's very easy for the liver to get congested.
Yeah, so it's almost, working on different things, that like my rebounders over here doing the dry brushing, doing the sauna, all these different things to open the pathways up. Because I think so many people get stuck on taking so many supplements. I really love Jody's Cohen's Vibrant Blue oils and adding essential oils to that. Do you ever work on essential oil work for opening up the lymphatic system and the liver drainage pathways?
I do a little bit, and I love Jody's products. She's amazing. And then you can add those lifestyle habits like you're doing, the dry skin brushing and the rebounding. Just walking is huge. I'm a big fan. We do a magnesium ramp up in order to make sure that people are having good bowel movements. That's a lifesaver for so many people. And magnesium is involved in over 550 different enzymatic reactions in the body, and it's always depleted in everybody who has fatigue. And so that's a big one that can really help get things moving. And then sleep is such a big part of this, because the brain shrinks by 60% when you go into deep sleep. So it's kind of like you're wringing the brain out and having it dump all of the toxins into the rest of the body. So sometimes if you take too much melatonin, which also helps this process, if you're groggy the next day, it's probably because it dumped a whole bunch of toxins into your system, and that could be why. So yes, supplements, great. And as well as the lifestyle habits that you can do in order to be able to, and then food, of course, the less toxic food that you're consuming and the less grains and the less sugars, the better off you're going to be able to detoxify. Do some juicing every once in a while, do some smoothies, but work with nature in order to be able to get this stuff out of your body.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So much to talk about. But the other thing is mold, because I found out, I think everyone in the Northwest has mold toxicity after no one ever tested that on me in the beginning. For 8 years, 10 years I owned a fitness studio in Bellevue that had the ceiling tiles were always damaged from the restaurant, and the yoga studio above me was always leaking, and I had water. So I finally got those tests last year. I'm like, I have severe mold toxicity, but I didn't really know I had it. And I think, how mold is related to so much the chronic fatigue, and then how that damages our mitochondria. And if you look at the cell danger response theory and how that is all kind of related, so it's not just adrenals that create the fatigue, but the whole belief of just the connection of the mitochondria damage with the mold and other co-infections.
Oh my gosh, that's such
That's a
an
whole nother
important
topic.
topic. Well, it's such an important topic. I'm so glad you brought it up, because, mold is so insidious, and most people don't think they have mold exposure. And when they actually think about it, because the reality of the situation is, if you have ever lived in a place that had water damage, either from a flood in the basement or a roof leak or a busted pipe, and you live in a place and you lived in a place that had humidity outside that was greater than 55%, which is not just the Pacific Northwest. You're right, we got a lot of that up here, but Florida and the East Coast, like a lot of these places can be very humid. I mean, except for the Southwest, there's a lot of the world that is very humid. And that is, if there's something that's wet and you add that humidity to it, you're going to grow mold, which is why, those stats are so staggering. Half of all buildings in first world countries have water damage, and most of those have mold. So people have to, when I talk about one test that people need to get, it's always to determine whether or not you're living in mold. The second test is to determine whether or not you have mold in your body. So those are the two tests that are really most important for so many of these people, especially if you don't believe it. If you don't believe it, it's usually true. But if you do believe it, it's still probably true. But it's such a big part of this process, and you have to figure out if you have mold in your body.
Well, that's why I was looking up research last week, because I have a client that has Lyme disease, and the oats test, and he found mercury, heavy metals, and then the oats test didn't really show high levels of mold. But then one of our medical directors said, well, you want to get a mycotoxins test, because usually there's mold toxicity and Lyme disease, and there's a relationship there. So it's almost, you have to really investigate really what's going on if you're
Absolutely.
tired.
Yeah, and there's research also to show that if you have mold and you have Lyme, that if you remove the mold, you're a lot more likely to get rid of the Lyme. And a lot of that is because when you have, and this works for heavy metals and chemicals as well. So when you have heavy metals, chemicals, and molds present, the immune system is no longer functioning correctly. And if the immune system is not functioning correctly, there is no way that you can take care of any infection in the body. This is why if you hit infections with antibiotics or antiviral, whether they're natural or prescription or whatever, you're not going to be successful if the immune system is not online. It's got to be a team effort where you've got immune system plus some natural antimicrobials, which is what we use, in order to be able to get rid of any infections that are present. And if you've got these toxicities, heavy metals, chemicals, molds, all bets are off that the immune system is going to be functioning correctly.
Yeah. Wow. A lot to dive into. So is this all in your book, Fix Your Fatigue, or how do people learn more about all this? Because there's so much.
There is
5 episodes with you.
Yeah, you can definitely learn a lot about it in the book. The book was done in 2017, so it's a couple years old. It doesn't have a lot of the most recent stuff. That's all in our online program, where people can learn more about that at fixyourfatigue.com, fixyourfatigue.com. And you can check out the free quizzes that we have, get educated on what we offer. And if you want to see if you're a good fit for our program, you can get on a discovery call. We get on a call with everybody, regardless of what you answer. And so we just, see if you're a good fit for our program.
Good job. Well, I love that you're following your purpose and you're just on a mission to help so many people. So how do you keep track of getting to 1 million?
How are we keeping track?
Yeah.
So we have questionnaires that we have people, progress and feedback questionnaires as people are going through the program, so that we can track their success. And then we can also track what needs to be improved, because I want to make this the absolute best program in the world for this.
Well, what number are you at, Dale?
That's a great question. I haven't looked at it recently, but it's a couple thousand at this point.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your information and time. I know we're out of time, but there's just so much to dive into with the thyroid and different diseases, and the EMFs, I think, are a huge thing to people, for them to look at. So what are some 3 kind of takeaways we can give people before we say goodbye?
So I would say the 3 takeaways are going to be around: find all of your causes. Don't stop until you do. Have hope that you can solve this problem. Like, this problem is very solvable. You just have to figure out what your causes are, right? Like, if you have an HR problem at work, or if your car is not functioning properly, you have to figure out what the problem is. And it just so happens with fatigue that there are just multiple problems, so you just have to find those. So that's the first thing. Find those. Number 2 is work on your mindset and go through that process of gratitudes. Just do gratitudes every day. Just start off and just say, if you don't want to do gratitude, just say thank you, thank you, thank you, and just get into that space of being thankful. And then I would say the last thing is find a mentor to work with. So whether you're working with Debbie, or whether you're working with me, or whether you're working with somebody else, find somebody who has had the problem and fixed it, or who has helped other people fix the problem that you have specifically. So if you have irritable bowel syndrome, you do not come to see me, right? I'm the fatigue guy, right? So you want to find somebody who focuses on the problem that you have, because you're going to be a lot more likely to have success, because that's what they do all day long.
Perfect. Love that. All right, you guys, we'll put everything in the show notes so you can follow Dr. Hirsch and read more and do his quiz on the website. So it's great. So we can everyone's got a little fatigue, especially the last year. So I'm sure you've got lots of people coming to your website now. So
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.